All right, before we get started with today's episode of CMO Weekly, I have to give a big shout out to OpenFortune. OpenFortune created the most memorable ad you've ever eaten. OpenFortune took the fortune cookie and turned it into a real advertising platform with 100,000 restaurants of distribution globally. OpenFortune has worked with brands like Verizon, Chime, and Duolingo. Shout out to OpenFortune for making today's episode possible. Welcome back to CMO Weekly, the show where we sit down with the sharpest minds in marketing to unpack how brand, creativity, and strategy drive today's biggest businesses. This week, we're joined by Leanne Fremar, the powerhouse behind some of the world's most recognizable brands. Leanne is the Managing Director and Global Chief Brand Officer at JPMorgan Chase, where for the past 6.5 years, she's led one of the most trusted and iconic institutions through a brand evolution grounded in innovation, customer connection, and cultural relevance. Before JPMorgan Chase, Leanne made waves at Starbucks as SVP, Global Head of Brands, leading global creative and marketing initiatives. And prior to that, she helped shape the voice of Under Armour Woman, Theory, and even Gucci and Ralph Lauren early in the digital era. From luxury fashion to financial services, Leanne's career is a masterclass in reinvention, storytelling, and building brands that actually mean something. Today, we'll talk about the intersection of creativity and financial services and what it takes to lead through brand transformations and why consistency, clarity, and courage still win in marketing today. Let's get into it. Leanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. So nice to be here.
I'm so stoked to have you, and we got this on the calendar. I was just pumped to ask all these questions. I got a lot that we're going to get into today, but let's start with your background, right, and how you got into marketing, growing up, right? What made that the right career path for you?
You know, I don't want to say I fell into it because I think that sounds like it was a bit of an accident, but I don't think when I started out in my career, I really understood that brand was a discipline that I could build a career in and, and have this incredible career in. I think when I started out, I was probably just, looking to get a job in a field that I was, excited about and that was visual. And I started out sort of in art and then quickly transitioned into luxury and fashion. But, building that career in brand was something that I discovered once I started working in some of these, sort of bigger brands. So, early in my career at Ralph Lauren, brand was a really important component of what Ralph Lauren was and how it went to market. And similarly at Gucci and at Keurig, we were working with many, many brands. And I really got to see firsthand how truly important brand is to, making a brand something that, consumers can really connect with.
Sure. And when you were growing up, was there a brand that made you feel a certain way that was your first taste of brand?
I mean, I think I always loved commercials, right? And I always loved retail. I loved to kind of go to the mall. I grew up in sort of suburban Toronto in Canada. And, a lot of our retail experience was kind of mall based and and then we had a downtown in downtown Toronto. And so
Malls were so cool.
Malls are great. I still love malls, by the way. Like I love a good mall. But when I loved retail. And I think that, while I didn't understand what brand was at the time, I really understood what retail was. And I loved to go to stores, whether it was like grocery stores or department stores or, even things like Canadian Tire, which, are sort of like, big box retail. I just kind of loved that whole experience.
Sure. And you've led brand strategy for a plethora of brands from retail to athletic to JPMorgan Chase, right? And Starbucks. What are some of the similarities and differences between those roles?
Between the roles?
Yeah.
I think...
And the brands behind those.
The difference in the roles has been, obviously, I was at different stages of my career while I was working across those brands. And so starting out, I was, a very junior person on the team. I was doing, whatever was asked of me, really. And, and I think trying to learn as much as possible from the people I was working with and working for. And as I sort of matured in my career, I obviously, was taking on more and more leadership roles, but similar in terms of thinking about, and working through the brand and the brand marketing component and, really the brand touch points for all of these brands. These are all really, really different brands, but I think at their core, brand fundamentally is sort of a similar function in a lot of the companies that I've had the good fortune to work in and for. And so, while the industries and the verticals and even the consumers are super different, the discipline is sort of, has been similar throughout, I would say.
Yeah, and what do you think separates a good brand from a great brand?
I think that great brands understand what makes them special and what makes them who they are. I think that when you are a brand that's chasing either other brands or your competitors or the consumer or trends, it's very easy, and I think often the case, that you can lose your way as a brand. I think brands that stay very true to who they are at their core, at the core of the DNA of the brand, which often really is connected to who is the customer that they are serving, what is the reason that they exist, and how does that customer evolve and change over time, and how does the brand change with it. But again, staying true to that core DNA is what makes great brands great. And I think when you look at some of the world's greatest brands today, and we can name, any number of them across any sort of spectrum of whether it be retail or luxury or service or goods, they really are, they are at their core true to the product and true to the consumer. And I think those core values, really show up in different ways.
And a lot of these brands are legacy brands that we've known, we've grown up with, right? When do you know it's time to evolve, and when do you know that it's time to stay the course?
I think, it's interesting. We just went through a rebrand of JPMC for JPMorgan Chase. This is a company that's been around for, over 200 years. And over the course of it's seen many, many iterations. But when we really looked at what we wanted to do for the rebranding of JPMC, I think that we wanted to ensure that we were properly articulating our purpose and our core values. And we established those alongside of the new brand identity. So it wasn't necessarily that we just decided to create a new look and feel for the brand. What we really did in the exercise was articulate our purpose and our values. And the new brand identity came out of that process, which is, how I would lead, which is to kind of, again, back to my earlier answer, like lead with what's core and true to the company. And then if you need to express, sort of a new articulation of your brand, you're doing it with purpose and with intention.
Sure. Brand is something too that affects every single person at the company. Myself, right? I've only worked for companies smaller than 20 people. JPMorgan Chase, a lot bigger,
Yeah.
right? How do you go about expressing your brand and educating your brand to those people who work there and also everyone else?
So, when you're working at companies big or small, but I think especially in big, when you're working at scale, trying to find things that are sort of universally true or that everybody can grasp onto or believe in is really important. And I think trying to keep those things simple, clear, and avoiding a lot of the sort of, I think, the things that the traps that people and brands, I think, sometimes fall into, where things might feel a little too jargony or a little too inside baseball. I think it's important to kind of tap into things that feel like universally people can understand, they can articulate, and they can say. So, in the instance of, again, back to the JPMC exercise around articulating our values and our purpose, to make dreams possible for everyone, everywhere, every day. Like, you want people to be able to get up and go to work every day and be able to articulate that to themselves. That's what they're doing here. And you want them to also feel like it's inspiring to them to do that every day. But you also want them to feel like it's authentic. Like if you're just paying lip service to that, and you don't really feel like the company is actually there to fulfill that purpose, it makes for a less fulfilling work experience for sure.
And you all operate in the finance area, which is often seen more as rational, right, than emotional. How do you put emotion into your advertising to make them feel that?
So we market, at JPMC, we've obviously got many different sort of brands, sub brands of products and services that we go to market.
You've said 16,
Yeah,
right?
it's about that. Yes, across Chase and JP Morgan, and then all the products and services that sit underneath are those businesses. And so again, I think, when you look at any one product or service, you really have to go and look at the consumer insights and the data. What is important to that customer and that audience, and what problem or is that product solving for them? And when you kind of break it down into its smallest pieces, it's sort of easy to articulate no, I wouldn't say easy, it's hard, but it's easier to articulate in advertising the joy in that, or the fun in that, or the importance of something, or the emotion of something. But you really have to go to the insights in order to be able to authentically articulate it. And so, that's how we run the brand practice here, and that's how we go to market here, is really ensuring that everything that we do is grounded in insights and data.
Sure. And one of the questions that I love to ask people is just about their bold moves in marketing. We hear about on Ad Age and all these magazines. What was the boldest move that you've made in your career?
I think that I've moved industries several times, and I think that, a lot of people questioned why I was doing that, or what I was even doing. And so I think the moves that I have made in my own career have been bold, uh, because I wasn't someone who came from financial services, or I wasn't someone who, kind of came up in a singular industry. I moved industries a lot, and I think that, that was something that I've actually enjoyed so much about my career. But it's definitely something that not everybody does, and it's not always really well understood why I did it.
What was your inner voice telling you during those decisions?
I think my inner voice was telling me that either the company I was going to really needed me, or the company that I was going to, there was a tremendous opportunity to do something that hadn't been done. Or, in certain instances, I was just really passionate about what that company was doing at that specific time, and I wanted to be a part of it.
Absolutely. And a lot of our listeners are younger, right? They are in their early 20s, early in their career, right? What advice would you give to yourself looking to build a career in brand or marketing?
I would say, you know, start out by trying a lot of different things. Marketing and brand are sort of vast fields, and there's so much that you can do across the industry and across across that field in terms of disciplines. Try different things. Try acquisitions. Try performance marketing. Try brand. Try creative. You know, try different things and see, you know, where you have a sort of a natural, where you're gravitating to. But even if you don't gravitate to each one of those things, you will have a good knowledge base of each of those things after trying them. And that's what helps you be, I think, when you're managing a larger team, or you're running a larger sort of operation, you're not always going to be able to go deep on every single subject matter, but you're going to have a good fundamental understanding of that discipline within a discipline, because you spent some time there and you really learned about it. And, when I talk to people today that are starting out in their career, a lot of them are very concerned about making sure that they have these linear paths, like they want to work one job for a year, and then they want to go to the next job, and they've got to be 2 years there. And I think it's good to be disciplined, but I also think it's good to try things. And the great thing about being young is you have the time and you have the flexibility and you have sort of the lower stakes in terms of, sort of your obligations to try things. And so I really encourage people to try things.
Absolutely. And you touched on it. You said the word linear path, right? If somebody was to look at your LinkedIn and what we talked about, it looks like a linear path, right? But tell me what it felt like while you were in it.
I was definitely not linear. I think that, over the course of my career, I've had recruiters, call me about things. And, oftentimes they would refer to me as a mosaic candidate, which, it really irritated me at the time. Because what it basically meant was, well, we can't put you in this box or this box. So you don't exactly fit this criteria or that criteria. And to me, that kind of always felt like a bit of a challenge. I didn't want to necessarily fit into a box. I wanted to work on some of the world's greatest brands. And thankfully, I've had the good fortune and the opportunity to be able to do that. And so, I'm glad I just sort of didn't listen to the detractors in that way.
Absolutely. Bringing us back to the future or the present and looking out to the future, right? AI is obviously a huge thing that everybody is talking about. Where do you see the future of brand building going with the technology of AI?
I mean, I think AI is going to bring amazing things to amazing tools to the industry in the near term. So I'm super excited about what we're seeing, in the development of applications that can help marketers get to market faster, create things easier, and just give us more freedom to experiment with tools. I think, it's everyone's in the sort of, in the habit now of predicting what AI is going to do. And I don't really know as well as anybody else, like where it's going to go. But I am excited to see like what will happen when, are there going to be sort of completely AI driven or generated brands? How will AI sort of tackle like sustaining and evolving those AI generated brands, or what recommendations will AI have for how to take brands in certain directions? I think it's going to be fun. And so
Absolutely. I can't wait. It'll be really, really interesting. And looking back on your career, right? What impact would you want people to say that you had on the world of branding?
I hope that, the brands that I've had the good fortune to be able to work on have meant something to people, to have meant something to consumers. I believe that they do. I hope that the people that I had the opportunity to work with and who are part of the teams that I was a part of, had a good experience and can look back on their career and felt like they learned things, that they were fulfilled, that they made good relationships, and, that they enjoyed their time, and that it wasn't too stressful.
We spoke about this a little before the interview, but was there a moment early in your career where you realized, like, I have a real knack for this? This is something that I'm good at, I'm great at, and I enjoy.
There wasn't a moment. I think that, I was excited about what I was doing, and I've been excited about what I've been doing all along. And so I would say it's not more that it was a moment as much as it was like a recognition of like, I'm doing something that like I'm great at or good at, or, on most of the time. I really enjoy it. And I feel like I can contribute and be a part of these companies and these businesses and help these businesses, to create these connections with their consumers or with their audiences. So it was more of a recognition of like, wow, I'm doing something that I really, really like to do. And I think that helped me kind of double down on it, and so it was great to be good at it, but it was also great that I really, really enjoyed it and that I had a great time doing it.
Sure. And mentorship, right, is a buzzword everybody talks about. Everyone's looking for a mentor, right? But I do believe, right, early on in your career, if you have a good boss or mentor, they can really set you on the right path. Was there somebody in your career that really helped you out?
I mean, I learned a lot from everyone I worked with, and I think I had the really amazing good fortune of being proximate to a lot of the world's most some of the world's, I would say, business world's most interesting brand visionaries and brand leaders. And each of them, I think, either inspired me from afar, or taught me something up close, and we can go into, examples of those, not to kind of, name drop, but just to articulate, like when I was very young, starting my career at Ralph Lauren, Ralph, was in the office every single day. He was in meetings. He would come and he would talk to us, as, in the department of marketing or brand, or at the time I was there in digital. And, I got to observe like his incredible attention to detail and how important it was for him to make sure that the customer experience had a lot of integrity. So he used to I'll give you an example, which we talked about earlier, which was, if you look at as an example, the Madison Avenue store and then the entrance on Madison Avenue, you never really see a door swing open and like there's the stock room sitting on the other side. And Ralph used to say something, I'm going to paraphrase, but like, don't break the dream. Really pull the integrity of the brand all the way through. And I saw that happen at Gucci under Tom Ford and Domenico De Sole. I learned that early in my career. I think later in my career, I had the opportunity to work for some incredible leaders, someone like a Howard Schultz, who I had the good fortune to work for, or certainly here, the entire, sort of operating committee are incredible leaders. Marianne Lake, Jen Peepsack, Jamie. I think here I've learned a lot more about the importance of leadership and really caring about the people that you work for, your customers, and work with your team and your and the larger organization.
Absolutely. And marketing is something, right, that is always changing, right? The ground is always changing underneath our feet. How do you go about continuing education throughout your career to make sure that you're staying on top of what is happening in the marketing world?
Yeah, that's I say an important part of the job. And I think that, being connected to, obviously reading everything that, you sort of can, and I get up in the morning and read, several newspapers, the trade magazine publications, I should say, then being sort of connected in conferences. I also like to jury. That's a way that I really stay close to the work. And so I sit on several juries, usually over the course of a year. Cannes Lion is one, but there are others. The Drum is another, where I get to really sit with my peers and hear conversations about what they think makes great work. You get to see all of the submissions. And so you get to see work from around the world that you wouldn't really otherwise see, if you were just kind of going through life as a consumer. And you get to learn from that experience. And so, I really look at being a juror as something that is a tremendous time commitment. But what I get out of it is actually, pretty amazing and gratifying. And I just get to learn so much from other amazing marketers.
Yeah. And if you were giving advice to somebody who was younger on like where to consume that media, there are so many choices, right? Where would you lend them? Which direction?
I would say, the trade publications are good at kind of giving sort of an inside baseball perspective. But I think the best teacher for me on understanding what's moving in the world of brands is like pounding the pavement. Like, get out there. Like, get. It's important to see what's happening on social media. Like that is absolutely a really important component of it. But get out there. Brands are doing incredible things in retail, in activations, in sponsorships, in events. Ask your friends what they're interested in, what they're shopping, what they're buying, like where they've had great brand experiences or not great brand experiences. Like, the information, I think, is pretty readily available if you sort of want to immerse yourself in it. And I love doing that. I think that's a great way to learn.
There's that famous quote, right? It takes a village. How do you describe your leadership style?
I would describe it as it takes a village. I don't do anything on my own. I have an extraordinary team of leaders that I have hired or been able to bring from the organization who sort of sit around my table, and we lead as a team. It's not about a singular vision or visionary. It's really about leadership. And then I have an enormous team of very special, very talented people that sit in my organization and in the organizations that we work with, who really come to work every day to help get things done. It is absolutely about, sort of playing with a symphony of experts, and
I like that.
and it's not about like showing up as a singular anything, not in the least.
Yeah. What do you look for in those younger folks who are looking to really join the industry? Is there certain traits that you want on your team?
I mean, I think people who are excited about the industry is that's important. I think that when you're someone who really wants to be a part of the industry, it shows. And so if you're passionate about brand or you're passionate about marketing, then, make that passion known. And I think that that enthusiasm and that spirit of being excited to be somewhere and happy to be somewhere is a great quality to have at any age, right? It's not about just being like young and in your career. Like, I hope you bring that to work, at any stage. but I do think that passion and that enthusiasm can go very far. You don't have to have necessarily like gone to college and majored in it or have a degree in it or a secondary degree in it. But if you show aptitude for learning about it and you show enthusiasm for being a part of it, that can propel you, into spaces and into places where you can then get that sort of subject matter expertise and learn about the industry and its component.
Sure. And we've spoken a lot about your career, right? But tell me a little bit more about your personal life, right? What are things that you like to do? How do you like to fill your time when you're not working and get inspiration from that?
Well, I'm fortunate. I have an amazing family, and so I get to spend a lot of time with them. My husband is in the music business, and so we get to spend a lot of time seeing, a lot of music and listening to a lot of music. I live in New York City, so I have the good fortune of being able to kind of have one of the world's greatest cities, like right outside my door. And so I get to, spend a lot of time in the city, which I love to do. And I think for work, I also get to travel. And so, as part of that, I always try to kind of do something inspirational, even if I'm going somewhere for work, go for a great dinner or drop in on a great museum or just visit a friend, just take advantage of being a part of, a place. And I get a lot of inspiration from retail. That's like a place. And I say retail, I kind of mean a little bit more IRL, whether that's like stores or experiences or events or restaurants, dining, just being out in the world, So I like to kind of spend my time doing that, with my family, hopefully, but also on my own. Good.
Perfect. Thank you so
Thank
much. That
you
was
so
wonderful.
much. That was fun.